Hey, hello, hello. If you are just joining me, you are like, hey, wait a second, that is clearly not Ethan. Yes, so my name is Chris Tronson. I'll introduce myself in a second. But if you are joining us, Ethan can't make it tonight. So hopefully, I do as good of a job as I can. But my name is Chris Tronson. I am a member of the board of directors for the International OCD Foundation. Additionally, I am vice president of OCD Southern California, which is one of the affiliates for the International OCD Foundation. And I am an IOCDF advocate. So, besides specializing in treating OCD and related disorders at the Gateway Institute in Orange County, California. Additionally, I am also a person living with OCD. So I advocate on behalf of the International OCD Foundation, share my story, talk about what worked for me, and really just trying to help spread awareness and information about OCD out there. So I typically actually lead the Ask the Experts on Wednesdays. So my live stream is every Wednesday at 12 Eastern. But I love community conversations. I like what both Ethan and Katie and the other hosts of these live streams have done, just really giving you all a place to find community, to connect with other people, and to just have support. I mean, as somebody with OCD, having no support and kind of having to fight it all alone is very difficult. It's already an isolating disorder. So having people to connect with, to speak with, to talk with is so, so important. So hang out with me for the next hour. I'm not as funny as Ethan, but I make people giggle. So I'll try to be as funny as I can. And I will be answering your questions both from a clinical lens as well as somebody with OCD and body dysmorphic disorder and major depressive disorder. So I can also answer questions from just a lived experience as well and what it's like living with those mental health conditions. So as you always know, I'm sure you've heard Ethan say, this is definitely something that we want to provide for you as a service, a support, help you find resources, education, information. But the one thing we can't be is take place of your therapist or being a service for anyone that is really, really struggling with a crisis situation. So if you're in that kind of situation, please reach out to 988, go to 988lifeline.org. If you're in the United States, dial 911, find your local emergency room. We really want to make sure that you're getting care. So if you're in the middle of it and need help, please utilize those services. But if you're not, and you're just here to learn more about OCD and have a community of people that get it and support, then you're in the right place. And I'm in my office. Sometimes you'll see me in the morning. I'm at home because it's so early on my live streams that I'm like, have morning stuff. And I'm like, I'm just going to do it from home. But I've been out all day. I do outdoor exposures and take my clients to places. And if you're in California, you know it's like 90 degrees. I'm dying in this suit. My collar looks like it's gone through it. So I apologize for being so wetty. But anyways, it's good to see everyone. Nick, I see your comment for Ethan at, I always have to do the time change in my head, at 6:58. And it seems like you want to connect with Ethan. I don't know. Emilio might know if there's an email or something that Ethan puts out there where you guys can all connect with him. But if not, Ethan will be back next stream, and please join and you'll be able to answer those questions. It's good to see you, Val. I got to see Val, who's an amazing IOCF advocate. I got to see her this morning at a meeting at like 9 a.m. my time. So it's now in the afternoon, but just we're excited that we're going to be bringing on new International OCD Foundation advocates and just talking about how to support the advocate program. So it's good to see that. It's good to see you, Deidre, and Anastasia and Spence. It's good to see everybody. It's good to see you, Nathan. AKG says you come to our Saturday Families and Loved Ones support group that I run with my mom. So my mom has publicly discussed what it's been like to be a mom of someone with OCD and offered help. So it's really, really awesome that you come to that. And hopefully you're not too bummed seeing me instead of Ethan. And then Val's at the park with her grandkids, which is awesome. Yes, it is definitely hot in LA. If you're just joining us, whether you're on Facebook, YouTube, X, Twitch, LinkedIn, or the iocdf.org/live, make sure you put a comment. I know for Ethan's, a majority of it is answering questions. So if you have any questions, comments, anything you're struggling with, please go ahead and put that down. Y'all gonna see me lean and grab my fan because it is so hot. And even though I have air conditioning, I'm like dying. So we're gonna be a little human right now and just turn on the fan, which is gonna make me feel a million times better. So there we go. Well, what I'm going to do until the questions coming in is just kind of talk a little bit. Actually, there's a lot of pre-submitted questions that I have, so I'll definitely look at that as well and read some of the questions that other people have had. Just asking different questions. We get a lot of people that pre-submit questions, or we don't always get to questions at every live stream, and I'll go ahead and answer some of those as well. But what I want to talk about, I always kind of have a different conversation. I run support groups where I work, and I always have different conversations that I kind of bring to the group, and we sort of chit chat at before everybody opens up and shares about what they're going through. And I think two things I want to talk about today is the first one is I want to see if other people relate to this, but those of us with OCD, we seem to operate in a very black or white mentality. So what I mean by that is a lot of times my clients, let's say with perfectionism OCD, they'll go to sit down and do like a project for school. They'll go to write like a report. They'll go to do like a workout or a morning routine, and they can't do it perfectly for whatever reason. Maybe they don't have enough time to do their full workout or their full morning routine. Or let's say like they want to sit down and write this paper perfectly, but they just can't do it. Then what a lot of times happens for people with OCD is then we just kind of stall. Like we'll go on our phones, we'll kind of scroll through Instagram or TikTok, or we'll watch like a movie or a video, and we just sort of space out because it's like we know we should be doing that thing, but we can't do it perfectly, so we just don't do it. Or a lot of times for people with OCD, if they buy a new item, they want to keep it perfect and they don't want to damage it or anything. And if like a scratch, or this used to drive my OCD crazy, my phone, I don't know if you could see it, but right here on the corner, there's a little like dent from where it fell. And when things like that happen to my stuff, I used to want to like throw it away or get a new one or get rid of it. It used to drive me so like intensely anxious, right? Or when it comes to black or white with scrupulosity, people want to be like the perfect Muslim or the perfect Christian, and they feel like if they have any negative thoughts, that means that they aren't saved or they're not a good person of faith. And so there's this desire to either be perfect and have all good thoughts and never think anything negative and be the best, faith, person, or not want to make any kind of, thoughts or moves or decisions that might be looked upon as like sinful, or if it's more moral scrupulosity, anything that is just not morally perfect, right? So a lot of people feel that when it comes to relationship OCD, a lot of people think, okay, if everything's good in my relationship, we're perfect, I don't need to ruminate. But if we get in a fight, or I hang out with my partner and we don't have a good time, then suddenly the relationship is not good. Why am I even in this relationship? It's not perfect. Sometimes with friendships as well, we'll get to that point where we'll be in a friendship, and let's say you guys hang out, go to a concert, you don't have a good time. It's like, wait, is the friendship not good? Are they bored with me already? Should I find different friends? So one of the things a lot of people I see is Estasia put in the chat, like, yes, I identify with that. So did Deidre. Is it Deirdre? Deirdre. I think I'm butchering it. A lot of people feel that way with OCD. Is like if things can't be a certain way, if it can't feel just right, I have to sit up and sit back down again, or walk in or out of the room. If I take a shower and I don't come out clean, I have to jump back in and take a full shower because I don't feel clean enough. So we feel like we have to do something to a certain level. Or if I don't do it to that certain level, I'm either just not going to do it at all, or I'm going to procrastinate, or I'm going to, miss things and then force myself to do it fully. So I think that's how I like to see it, is where we are, like we have to do things perfectly. I'd love to get, so Isastasia says at 713, I have laundry scrupulosity, as silly as it sounds. I always think like there's no silly, any OCD, right? Like, unfortunately, our OCD can kind of latch on to anything. And I think that's kind of, when people ask us, like, what's the difference between OCD and generalized anxiety? That's one of the things is typically with OCD, a lot of our thoughts feel a little bit outside the norm and we feel shameful or embarrassed to open up about them. Whereas somebody with generalized anxiety might be a little bit anxious about, a test coming up or going to the airport for an international flight. But those of us with OCD, you're talking about tons and tons of unwashed clothes. Yeah, I mean, that goes right back to that black or white thinking. If we can't do something, if it makes you feel better, it's testosterone. I have the same because it's like I don't have scrupulosity around my clothes. But for me, it's like one thing I have to work on is my brain wants to either dial in or just check out. And so for me, it's like if I'm going to do laundry, it's like, okay, I have to stop what I'm doing and just lean into laundry. But what we all have to do is what I call create that gray. So for me and you as Anastasia, what I have to do is I will do laundry and then go do other things. And then when it dings, go in there, take it out, put it in the dryer, put something in the washer, go do something else until it dings. So it's us kind of pushing through and creating that gray or that balance instead of like either I do my laundry like this or I don't do it at all. And that's what we get stuck in. And then a lot of clients will say, I'll ask them like, hey, what were you doing instead of doing laundry? And they'll say, oh, I just was kind of sitting there like scrolling on my phone, you know? Why? Because they're just like, if I scroll on my phone, it'll distract me. I know I need to go do the laundry, so I feel guilty doing anything else. But if I just sit there and I do, if I'm on TikTok or if I'm watching Netflix and stuff, it's like a holding point and I can kind of just delay or check out until it's time to, um, fall asleep or use that adrenaline. That's the other thing is sometimes what we'll do is we won't do something and then we just like wait for that adrenaline to come in and like kick us in the butt to get us to finish something. Yeah, AKG, create the gray. I mean, for us with OCD, like that's one of the hard things that we have is a very rigidity. A lot of our life is like super rigid. We have certain rules we have to follow. We have certain patterns we have to create. We have to do something until we feel just right or less anxious. And if we can't do it right, like if we can't do it absolutely perfectly, then we get to a point where, or we can't do those rules or we can't follow those patterns, then we don't want to do it at all. And I think that's why I don't know. I was telling a client this. I've no clue if this relates to anybody, right? But right now on TikTok, there's a trend. It's called the imposter game. And it's basically where like a group of friends or family members sit around and all of them have the same word, but one of them doesn't. They just have a card that says imposter. So let's say the word is zoo, or let me think of something easier. Let's say it's hamburger, right? Everybody will go around and share a word that kind of lets everybody else know that they know what the word is, but not too precise, like McDonald's, right? Where then the imposter can guess it. But my client was showing me this trend and saying, this is how OCD feels. It's like everybody else has like the same card and the imposter is lost and confused. And when we have OCD, that's how it could feel, right? Like everybody else is able to just get on a plane, whereas you might have to do like tapping before getting on the plane or like visualizing the plane landing safely so that there won't be a crash, or everybody else can just sit down and eat and you have to sit there and like look at the packaging and look at the expiration date to make sure it's not expired. So that's why having OCD is so tough, is we have these kind of like rules that OCD demands we follow. And going back to the create the gray motto, it's really just saying like, okay, we're going to create balance, we're going to create gray. So I'm going to eat and I just saw my parents grocery shop, so the likelihood that the food is spoiled is pretty slim. So I'm not going to give OCD that attention, and everybody else is eating it. It's more likely that it should be good. Let me just try it. I can't know for sure, but let me just eat the food and see what happens and trust that if it doesn't go well, I can manage or handle it, right? So that's living in the gray, is like taking some risk, breaking some rules, being more flexible. Lewis, it's good to see you, man. Thank you so much for your kind words. Lewis said that I'm an inspiration of the OCD community. Virtual handshake. I try. Been dealing with this stupid disorder for so long. Like, I just want to share with y'all that you can get better. And what worked for me, obviously treatment, but so many other things kind of helped me as well. Um, so I think one of the things, the second thing I wanted to talk about is a lot of clients in my young adult group have noticed that it's summer right now, and whether it's high school or college, they've noticed their OCD is worse because they have a lot of free time. And those of us without with OCD can't necessarily get so busy that we just have, nothing, no free time. But I hope everybody hearing this today thinks about it. It's really helpful to have other things going on in your life. That could be volunteer work, that could be a job, school, a hobby, traveling, a pet. It doesn't have to be grandiose if you're not at that place yet with your treatment or recovery where you can work or you can go to school, right? Instead, you want to think about it like, how can you incorporate some things in your life so that you have some structure? You get up each day, you head to the gym, or you head somewhere for breakfast. I know for me, my that's what my psychiatrist said. He's just like, look, Chris, like part of the reason you're not thriving in your treatment as much is because you have nothing else to do. So if you feel triggered and you have to do 2 hours of compulsions, it's like, well, I don't have anywhere else to go and might as well just do the compulsions, right? So one of the things I used to do in my treatment is every day I'd leave the house at 10 and I wouldn't let myself go home till 5. I didn't have a lot to do. So I'd drive down to the beach and like walk around in the water a little bit. Actually, I didn't walk in the water because I thought it had bacteria, but I walked on the sand far enough away from the water. I used to go to Barnes and Noble and read a lot. When I got comfortable enough, I'd go to the gym. But my point is like when I started having structure, now OCD has to compete with all these other really important things that I have in my life. And so when OCD would make demands, it's like, sorry, buddy, I'm at the bookstore and I'm trying to finish this magazine or this book, right? Or sorry, I'm getting a breakfast burrito at a place by the beach. I can't go do compulsions. So as I got better, I started volunteering at an animal shelter. I started taking tennis lessons, Spanish lessons. I ended up getting back into martial arts. Eventually, I got a job at the gym, went back to school. But every single time I added something into my life, I started to notice, like, wait a second. I got back into reading, got some other hobbies. OCD was quieter. And I want you to think it's like if you're in a quiet room, empty room, and nothing's going on, then man, I mean, with OCD, it can scream and yell at you. But if you're out running about and busy and OCD was trying to talk to you, it has to compete with so much other stimuli. So I don't know if any of you all can relate to either the black or white thinking, or do you notice like at times in your life when you were busier and had more going on, did you find yourself noticing that the OCD had a lot more to compete with and it was a little easier to shrug off? Yeah, as Estasia says at 7:20, as Liz says, make your life bigger than OCD. It's so true. I think part of it too is because as you get busier, you have commitments, and you don't want to be late to work, so you kind of skip some of your compulsions to make it. Or I know a big thing for me is like as I started to make friends, I would go out and they would, sometimes want me to drive. And somebody would do something in my car, nothing major, but would touch something or move something in my car that I didn't want touched, but I wasn't going to embarrass myself in front of my friends and like yell at them or tell them not to do that or to put it back. So instead, I would just keep my mouth shut. And then what I would notice is over time, I just kind of got used to it. If people were kind of opening up my glove compartment and checking things or putting a drink or something in the middle part, or, we went out to eat and they didn't wash their hands thoroughly enough and put on the seatbelt. Or I used to have thoughts like a fear, like, what if I get in a car crash and they die and I survive? Like, how would I ever tell their family, or how would I ever be okay just living knowing that my passengers died? And so it's just like, well, they want to get in my car and I have to drive. So I guess I'm going to have to face it today. So I think that's what's good about being busy is you just get to a point where you're so busy and you've got so much going on that you're just like, sorry, like I have nothing else. I have to face everything because there's nothing else I can do. Yeah, like AKG says, if you have time to fill the time with OCD rituals, I mean, that's totally what happened. It's like I'd find myself bored, and it was not that you like OCD, but like, I used to take hour-long showers. I used to take 4 a day, which was very excessive, but I'd take an hour-long shower, and it was fine because I didn't have anywhere else to go. And then when I'd get out, I'd look at the clock and I'm like, okay, at least some time went by. Whereas I think with when you're busy, you just don't have that time. I could not take an hour-long shower today. I wouldn't make it to my first meeting this morning. I'm gonna put in some questions, but like I said, feel free, y'all, to jump in, ask questions, make comments. I'm gonna read some of the questions. These are questions from like past live streams that we didn't get to. But someone asked, can major research like reading books, listening to podcasts, and reading uh, articles become a compulsion of scrupulosity? Absolutely. Absolutely. So, what we want to think about is part of the goal is to make sure that every behavior or decision that you make comes from a values based place. So, what I mean by that is like the motive is you want to get something done because it matters to you, it's important, it's something you care about. So, when we have OCD, it's important to read books and listen to podcasts and understand the disorder and how to beat it and how to get better from it. But if it starts to get to a point where you're trying to hear like an exact word or hear something specific, or let's say in scrupulosity, right? Like you're trying to hear like an exact phrase or an exact word that makes you feel like you can do treatment and still be living a life of faith, right? If you're searching for something, you're trying to relieve anxiety or get an answer or something like that, that's when it becomes compulsive. So remember, we don't have to take a black or white approach to treatment either. It doesn't mean that you should stop, reading books, podcasts, or articles either about OCD or about your faith, right? Because just because you have scrupulosity doesn't mean you can't listen to faith-based podcasts or read, you know, biblical books. And it doesn't mean you can't read OCD books and stuff, but how are you doing it? Work with your therapist. What would be some limits that are good to set? Some boundaries. Why are you reading it? And a good way to know is like, let's say you feel the urge to read an article, set a timer, an hour, and say, you know what, I'm going to check in an hour. Let's see if I still feel the urge. And if in an hour you're like, wow, I don't think it's OCD, I just want to read it, go right ahead. But if in an hour you're like, wow, that was the toughest hour of my life, why didn't I read that? I need the answer. There's a subtype of OCD called meta OCD, and that's where you start getting obsessed about OCD, obsessed about the treatment, obsessed about obsessing. And I'll notice that a lot. Clients with that, it's like, man, they're reading every new OCD article, research study, everything, because they're just like, oh my God, I have to get answers. I have to know everything about the treatment. So I do the treatment perfectly and I get better perfectly. And I never deal with OCD again. So part of their recovery is to cut back on how much OCD information you intake. So having boundaries, making sure you know why you're doing something is very, very important. Another viewer asked, is DBT helpful for OCD? So DBT stands for dialectical behavioral therapy, and it was originally created for people with personality disorders, specifically borderline personality disorder. And it's a treatment that works on cognitive flexibility, interpersonal relationships, helping yourself really monitor and relieve yourself from intense emotions. It's also really helpful for people that are having a lot of suicidal ideation or like self-harming. There's a really good book written by John Hirschfield. It's a workbook, and it's an anxiety and OCD workbook for strong emotions. And he uses some stuff from dialectical behavioral therapy. Dialectical behavioral therapy, in its purest sense, when people do have a personality disorder, is like a 6 month to a year treatment. You do groups, you connect with your therapist outside of sessions. So it's very regimented. But a lot of clinicians, myself included, will take some stuff from dialectical behavioral therapy that is helpful specifically for those strong emotions and utilize that for a client in need. So, for instance, one of the aspects of DBT is called TIP. And that is an acronym for, I hate this acronym because it never rolls off my tongue: temperature, intense exercise, progressive muscle relaxation, and something about breathing. I always forget the P for breathing. But basically, like for me, what was really helpful in my own OCD treatment is like I remember being at a party once, as I started getting better in treatment and making friends, I got invited to a party. And one of my OCD obsessions was getting alcohol on me, like if somebody spilled it. Because in my brain, I would absorb the alcohol through my skin and then I'd be out of control and I'd harm someone or do something irreversible and then go to prison for it or embarrass myself or just something negative. And I remember I was so triggered in a party, but I didn't want to let myself leave. So I went to my car, I blasted the air conditioning, turned it on my face, and got some water. I had some water in the car and drank it so it'd cool my temperature down. Then took some water on my wrist and like sit there with the air. I like dropped my shoulders and my jaw and just slowed down my breathing. And within like 3 to 4 minutes, I was calm. And then I was like, had a powwow. I'm like, all right, we got to go back in there. You've got to face this OCD. Nobody's spilling and dumping alcohol on you. So is there alcohol at this party? Sure. But you know what? You're over 21. Go have a good time. I don't drink, but, still go have fun and everything. So that quick kind of 5-10 minute break helped me turn around and go back in the party. So it is something that there are, some really, really helpful things in it as well. Nathan, you read Mike Jenike's book about OCD. Yeah, is that Deirdre said, is that Life and Rewind? If you haven't read Life and Rewind, Deirdre talks about it at 728. It's a book written by Mike Jenike. Let me search. I don't know if he has any other book, but you'll have to let us know. Books, OCD. You'll have to let us know. I'm trying to see if he's written any other books real quickly, but yeah, I only see Life and Rewind. Yeah, so that was a really, really good book. I read it a long time ago, so give me some slack. But what I remember about the book is, oh, he's written a couple other books, but I think you're talking about that one. So Life and Rewind, it was a book. Let me send the link to. There we go. It's Emilio, so you could put in the chat. But it was a really good book. In fact, I think there was even talks about making it into a movie. But it was somebody who had OCD, and his biggest fear was like time, and that he would like age and die, and like time would go fast. So for some reason, his OCD said if he kind of lived in the basement of his home and he didn't leave his house and he stayed in this basement, that time would slow down and like he wouldn't die as quickly or something like that. I read it so long, so long ago. I'm so bad. Oh yeah, he was afraid about. I think his mom was dying of. His mom had died from cancer, and so he was afraid like he would die of something quickly. So for about 3 years, he ended up living in the basement to try to prevent himself from like dying. That's just what his OCD said. That's why it's like Life and Rewind. He thought that it would slow down the possibility of him dying. But yeah, Dr. Jenike went there once a week for 3 hours every week. And even though he was a really, really severe case, and Michael Jenike worked, um, 3 years, yeah, I won't spoil the end of the book, but it was a really powerful book. And I think all of us need to hear success stories, because I think one of the things that's part of the reason why I end up, doing all this advocacy work and doing these live streams, because for me, it's just people need to know there's hope and people get better. I mean, I was at a point where I was housebound. I wasn't leaving my house for 3 years except to go out in the middle of the night to places, 24-hour places, and get the bare necessities. Not bare necessities, that's a Disney ride, but like the basics, right? So, soap, shampoo, food. But every day I was just at home for 3 years until eventually I just crashed, hit rock bottom, spent a year and a half trying to get help, and then finally found an OCD specific clinician who understood OCD and how to treat it. So part of the reason I share my story is I lived for so many years, 21, 22 years without a diagnosis and not knowing anything about the disorder, and eventually got to a point where I got help and I got better. So you can get better, but reading books is so important, or watching live streams or hearing from other people about getting better. That's why Ethan's live streams are always great, is because it reminds you, people get better. Okay, so you read a different one, Nathan. It was okay, that's the other one I saw, the practical management. So that one looks like it's more of I just saw that one. Yeah, right here. That one seems more like a treatment manual, right? Those of you who don't know who Dr. Jenike is, he is a really cool human, but also he was a brilliant mind. He was a psychiatrist that was the one that found McLean at Harvard. And beyond that, I mean, he used to answer my emails late at night, like when I first started treating clients, to give me some answers and direction. He would always like spend so much time talking to people and answering their questions about OCD. He was just a really cool guy. So shout out to him. Rest in peace. Lewis asks at 7:43, Chris, do you still have feelings like you might slip back into an OCD lapse? No, don't be sorry to ask. It's a really good question. So I always want to paint a truthful picture of my recovery, because sometimes people will hear my story and think that I was just like the best student and just got better. I had ups and downs. There was definitely lapses after my treatment. I think what was hard is because I was so severe and just at home in my room all the time. When I got better and I started volunteering at an animal shelter, I started getting thoughts like, what if you get an animal borne disease? Or what if you accidentally, like, the dog runs away and you lose one of the dogs? Or, God forbid, like, what if I step on the dog? Or when I got a job at the gym, I started having thoughts like, what if when you're re-racking the weights, you don't do it sharp enough or strong enough and then they fall and injure someone? Same with martial arts. That was a big fear of mine. Like, what if you hurt someone when sparring? Spanish, I didn't really have any fears when I got into the Spanish. But tennis, a lot of times I was like, what if, like, you kind of hit hard and grunt? Like, what if I curse or I say something offensive? So a lot of stuff popped up for me after treatment. And as I navigated into real life, it was a very bumpy road. And I think what helped me is journaling, so I could journal my successes. And that's why my mom was such a huge part of my recovery, is because my mom and I would talk, and I'm like, Mom, treatment doesn't work anymore. Like, everything is falling backwards. And she'd remind me, hey, just last week you were celebrating wins. And look, you're working now and you're doing these activities. A year ago, 2 years ago, you were stuck at home. So I think it's reminding yourself of the positives. Also, I took medication and I stayed on it for many years after treatment just to make sure I had that support. I was a little nervous when I stopped seeing my therapist altogether and stopped going to a psychiatrist and titrated off the medication. I think my journey is a little unique because then I started advocating for OCD and became a therapist. So, like, I'm doing stuff all the time now that would have spooked me out when my OCD was bad. I never drank caffeine for the same reason I was triggered by alcohol, because I was afraid that either it'd rush and my heart would, I'd have a heart attack, or it would, zap me up so much I'd do something I regret later on when I was of clear mind. And I went with a client today and we went to a coffee place and got matchas. So that definitely would have, like, freaked me out. Or I hated going to fast food places because I thought the grease from cooking the fast food I would inhale it and then get, like, cholesterol and die early, because a lot of my OCD was around death and illnesses and different health scares. So because I started advocating and talking about OCD and then treating it and then doing things with clients, I think it's just kept my OCD quiet. Now, I always tell people that's not what you have to do. You do not have to become an advocate or a therapist to stay in remission. But what you do want to do is you want to make sure that your life looks the way that it would without OCD, and that every day you're making choices that keeps OCD at bay. I remember I did a talk once with other people with OCD, and one of the speakers, she's like, you know what, I may be in recovery and doing really well, but she's like, every morning she had hit and run OCD with her car. She's like, I always drive the longer way because I go by a school, I go on speed bumps, and it just keeps my OCD in check. Another client was like, you know what, I got a job. Like, when they didn't get a job, but when they got a job, they had certain options of where to work at. And, they were like, hey, I really want to work in this department. And, I'm going to be around sharp items and cutlery. I think it was for a warehouse that sold equipment to restaurants and stuff. And they're like, I'm going to be around a lot of sharp objects. I'll keep my OCD in check. So I think for you, Lewis, and for everybody watching this, like, if your lifestyle looks so different from when it was with OCD, also, I think going back to our original conversation today, that's also what helped me, is like, I have friends, I date, I work, I advocate, I go places, I travel. It'd be hard for me to, I can't always control if the thoughts come back in, but it'd hard for me to give back into those, because it would mean I would have to give something up. I remember Ethan saying that in a talk we did so many years ago. It was a talk at USC, I think, and then another talk we did at Renewed Freedom Center at Dr. Jenny Yip. But Ethan said that he's like, every time I go to do a compulsion, I have to ask myself, what am I giving up? And I'd have to give up way too much to go back to OCD. So I also want to put out there, do not beat yourself up or shame yourself if you do have a relapse. It's not a fault of your own. Sometimes it means you just got to get back into treatment, even if it's less frequent. Go back to seeing a psychiatrist, maybe get back on medication. But I think if your lifestyle is living in a way that you're always sort of purposely facing the OCD and keeping it small and in check, that's really, really helpful. Uh, Fabienne says at 7:33, I found a new therapist. That's awesome. Remember, you want to find a therapist that um, uh, you like, that you're happy about. You seem happy, Fabian, about and I'm probably butchering your name. I'm so sorry. At 7:33, but you want to be excited about your new therapist. I always think your connection and your relationship to your therapist is so important. For me, they asked me what type of therapist I wanted, and I wanted a female for some reason. I don't know why. I just felt less intimidated. But I also wanted a therapist like kind of younger, but a little bit older than me. So I was like 21 when I went to treatment, or 22. And if I had to guess, my therapist was in her mid 30s, but she was still young. We could still vibe on things, but she was old enough that I kind of felt like I'm a little people pleaser, I have a little of that. So I was like, I'm going to do my homework. I don't want to let her down. So although it's important to find a therapist that really knows and understands the disorder and the treatment, I mean, you've got to have that, right? Like that's just a guarantee. You got to also still find somebody that ends up you click with. You want to be able to see them every week or multiple times a week, right? Somebody asked, pre-submitted, can you offer some insight on challenging OCD through ERP when the theme or the fear is about ethics and not compromising on values? So that was a pre-submitted question. So what they're basically asking is they're afraid of being unethical. So probably a little bit about moral scrupulosity. So when we have moral scrupulosity, what that means is like we have a set of rules that we want to live by, maybe not necessarily from a faith, but just good humanity, good karma, being like a moral and ethical person. And a lot of times, if your OCD centers around doing something unethical, that's the question, right? Well, like, am I going to have to compromise on my values? Sorry, I forgot to grab my water, which is not good. I talked all day as a therapist and now, but it's all good. I'll just swallow my spit. But what happens if you are afraid that you're going to compromise your values or go against your own ethical morals through ERP? So a couple answers I have for that. First and foremost, therapy needs to be collaborative. Therapy is not fear factor. You should not be doing a bunch of things that you're ashamed by once you get better, or you're embarrassed by, or like you have to do, and your therapist is like, no, sorry, I can't do that, right? You really want to make sure that you're doing things that are aligned with your values and make sense, but aren't breaking laws or breaking moral codes. So, one of the things, this is a perfect example. I worked with a client who didn't like to break rules. So we're obviously, for treatment, not going to go like rob a bank to break a rule, right? But one that, we kind of collaborated on is, I was like, what if we go to Costco and we just go in and we walk around without a Costco membership and we try some of the sample food and we go to buy something, and then either they're going to let us buy something or they're not. Now, at the time, they weren't as strict. Now, if you go to Costco, there's like a whole army at the door, and they like scan your fingerprints, DNA. You have to give them a blood sample. And I'm just kidding, swab. But no, they're a little bit more intense at the front. But at the time, it wasn't. So we walked into Costco. We tried some samples, and then we like shopped a little bit. And we tried to buy stuff, and they wouldn't sell it to us because we didn't have a Costco membership. But that was a way for them to sort of break rules without it being something illegal or unethical. We were fully going to pay for the items we bought. So that's what you want to do for the person that asked this question, is definitely make sure that you are doing treatment that you feel good about, and it's teaching you something and you're getting a lesson, but it's not compromising who you are. Because like I said, you should not have to do things that makes you just feel like a horrific person. Don't do that. Yeah, Nathan says one of the greats in OCD research. Absolutely, Michael Janicki was. Jen at 738 says, I still avoid things because it's easier. So, what I want to say, Jen, because I felt the same way when my OCD was bad, right? Is it does make it easier in the short term. So, we always have a decision when it comes to OCD. Let's say I want to go to my nephew's soccer game, but I would have to sit on public benches and I would feel uncomfortable doing so. You can totally avoid either don't even go at all or you go, but just stand up the whole time. So you don't have to, to sit down on the public benches and you'll feel better. Totally. And I always tell people you will absolutely feel better. But think about what it's teaching your brain. It's saying, hey, despite the fact that everybody else is sitting on these public benches, something is wrong with me and something is wrong with the situation, and I can't do the same. Well, the problem, and I'm not shaming you, Jen, because trust me, I have OCD and I've avoided a lot in my life until I really, honed in on the treatment and understanding the principles of ERP and facing your fears. What happens is then when you leave, every time you have to go back to those public benches or to another one of your nephew's games, you're going to always have that ick feeling, that resistance and feeling uncomfortable, and you're always going to need to do that. And over time you reinforce it so much that pretty soon the thought of ever sitting on those public benches feels too overwhelming. And then it starts to attack and translate other things where suddenly it's just like, oh my goodness, now everything feels bad and everything feels dirty and I can't go to any public stuff, and it grows and it grows and it grows. So what I tell people is it's okay to come up with like safety compromises if you're working towards the final goal. So maybe you go to your loved one's games, but you bring, your own chair and you set up your own chair. So you're still watching the game, you're in a public space, but you're sitting in the chair. And then maybe the next time you go, you sit on the benches, but you put down a towel. And then maybe the next time you go, you put down just like a little shirt or something thinner than a towel. And then eventually you go, but you sit down. But then when you get in the car and get home, you wipe off your chair. Do you see what I'm saying? Like you kind of make these little compromises. And eventually the goal is that you moved far enough away from the OCD that eventually you're like, you know what? I'm just going to sit on the dang benches and have a good time. Right. So that's the goal, is to do things small. What are you capable of doing as long as you're moving towards the finish line? So, Nikki, always good to see you. Highland on YouTube at 741 says, how do I stay motivated when close people in your life sometimes get upset, both if they see you doing a compulsion or see you anxious after an exposure? It makes exposures even more stressful. So I don't know, Highland, if you've done this yet. So let's say you're my client. What I would really, really want to do is invite those people in. So it's probably family, right? Or somebody you're living with. And what I'd explain to them is that they are not supposed to be nitpicking your every existence, because that's what it sounds like. And that's what a lot of us feel, right? It's like you're going out there and like, you've done exposures all day, you've been kicking OCD's butt, and then something pops up and you're just too tired. So you cave in. And especially sometimes you cave in, but you do a lot less than you normally would. It is so defeating and invalidating everything you've worked towards if people get upset or frustrated, right? It makes you feel like you failed and it's hurtful. And then you're way less likely to do more exposures that day. You kind of just want to check out. Or let's say with that second part, right? Exposures are going to make people anxious because you've created a set of rules that you've been living by, and you're taking a brave step to like face it. Of course you're going to be stressed and anxious and try to be processing and making sense of it. So I feel like, Highland, it's probably your therapist's responsibility more than you to educate them so they start to react to you different. Somebody said it earlier, but I don't know in the world, but at least in the United States, my mom and I run the largest family and loved one support group in the US. Because it's a free group and an educational group and not like a treatment group where everybody goes around and gets like direct clinical information. We always start with like a guest. Sometimes it's families that have overcome OCD, it's researchers, it's therapists, etc. But a lot of times people will send their families there. So if you email info@OCDSocal, so that's SOCAL.org. Once again, that's info@OCDSocal.org. We're an official affiliate of the International OCD Foundation. The group itself isn't part of the affiliate because you can't really have a group for an affiliate, but it's a group that my mom and I run. That's an easier email we found than my mom's email because people can't spell our last names. But you can invite them to that group. It's not the type of group that they have to sit and open up and talk about, personally what's going through. They can listen, they can ask questions in the chat. That might be helpful. Let's say they won't go, or let's say you don't have a therapist and you're really doing this on your own, or they refuse to go to the therapist. What I always think about is like, what is the best educational medium that they might listen? Are they podcast listeners? Do they like science, articles, YouTube? And what you do is you just send them a link of the type of medium that they like. So let's say they're good with YouTube videos. You find a YouTube video of a clinician talking about what loved ones should do instead of putting people down or getting frustrated. And you send it and say, hey, this is what the research says. I really hope you all can kind of listen to this and maybe make a change. So you're definitely valid to feel that way. I hope that helps. Yeah, Nathan says at 742, I don't like to have to compromise my values. You shouldn't. I think a lot of times that people read up on OCD treatment, they think it's like Fear Factor, where, if I'm afraid of saying horrible racist words, I have to drive and like yell those words in my car. Or, if I want to break a rule, I have to like steal something from a friend. I mean, treatment shouldn't be icky and sticky. I do all my exposures with a lot of clients, if it's not in the office, in public. If they have a problem eating at a restaurant or driving, I'm not doing anything that's like illegal or, against values, because we're doing it in public. People would stop us and say something, right? So people get better, really better, without having to compromise the values. You're so kind, Lewis. Lewis just says, thank you. Our thoughts sound alike. Yeah, I always tell people, even if we have different subtypes, all of us with OCD share certain common things. Like, a lot of us think black or white. It's hard for a lot of us to make decisions. We want to do something perfect. We want to absolutely eradicate anxiety from the face of the earth. So a lot of us definitely do it. Jen says, I can't imagine not being afraid. This is at 749 of OCD, 2 nervous breakdowns and a suicide attempt later. I feel like I have a really good handle on it, but I'm always terrified of a relapse. You know what I say, Jen? Because sometimes people with meta OCD, they start scanning their every feeling. Like, do I feel anxious? Do I feel nervous? Am I going to relapse? And sometimes that can actually put you in an uncomfortable, position itself. So it's not that you go to the other extreme and just don't care, but just remember the basics of treatment, like not giving into the thoughts, not shifting your behavior or your values because of OCD. It's okay to get anxious at times, right? So just making sure you can be on top of your mental health, but don't let it become compulsive to where sometimes that actually makes people more anxious and freak out even more, you know? Highland says, thank you. They have come to therapy, but maybe they need support or a different medium, like you're saying. I'll look into the resources. Yeah, like I said, info@ocdsocal.org. If you go to ocdsocal.org, you'll see like our website. There's some posts about the groups, past groups, so you can kind of see what we have. But yeah, sometimes they need their own therapist and they need to kind of process and learn how to deal with what they're really struggling with. Nathan says OCD causes me to have a hard time doing critical thinking. Part of the reason that's hard, at least I find, is like when I go to think about something, like something else will spark something and then it wants me to research that, or I'll research something or look something up and then my brain's like, that's great, but what about this thing? So it just consistently kind of moves around. So sometimes you gotta recognize the way that it's playing some tricks and move on. Pre-submitted, we got asked, do clinicians think about positive ways that ADHD can mitigate symptoms of OCD and those with comorbidities with these two disorders? So I had, it was Dr. Poskar on, he was talking about how sometimes having ADHD can actually make it harder to have OCD and get better in treatment if you're not getting the ADHD treated. Because think about it, like if you're finding yourself giving into impulsive decisions all the time, if you're triggered and your brain is like, go wash your hands, if you're giving into impulsivity, that may have you go and wash your hands before you even recognize what's going on. But what I do hear from some clients is that their ADHD can sometimes get them to like move on from a thought easier and focus on other things, or get distracted and kind of go do something they like, even if OCD said not to, or other times make them a little bit more loose and relaxed when the OCD has them overthink. So sometimes they can, because they're such polar opposites, ADHD can make somebody get unstuck in things. The only problem is you're not really ever facing the OCD. You're just kind of getting distracted and move on to something. But that's what I've heard from clients. They've just said like, oh, it's actually kind of nice sometimes because it helps me move it. Yeah, HG says, but ADHD meds can worsen OCD symptoms. Yeah, that's always the struggle with medications for ADHD is some people say it makes it so much better. Like they get to a point where the impulsivity gets checked and they're less likely to give in. But other people absolutely will say like ADHD medication, because it's a stimulant, will replicate the feelings of anxiety and just feel a lot more anxious all the time. So similar to caffeine, some people say there's L-theanine, I think as it's pronounced, as a supplement some people take, and they think it helps them with OCD and anxiety and focus. But it's found in green tea. So some people that drink green tea and matcha, like myself, will say, "Oh, it makes us feel more calm. It will make people focus better." But other people will say drinking caffeine makes my OCD 10 times worse. So I always think you got to kind of like play the good with the bad. Like, is it helpful? Is it not helpful, etc. Hey, Phyllis, don't mind me. I'm not Ethan. So if you came to look for Ethan, I'm so sorry. But hopefully you'll have a fun time with us. Um, if you're just joining us, like I said, keep putting those questions, whatever platform you're on, can answer them from both a lived experience and a clinical lens. There was a question that somebody pre-submitted that says, why do we have multiple OCDs? Basically meaning, why do we have different subtypes? So one thing I want you to think about is like with OCD has to tackle something that matters to us. So if you have the fear of like harming your pet, you got to care about your pets. If you have OCD around harming children, you got to care around children. If you have OCD about having blasphemous thoughts, you got to care about the God that you're worried about having thoughts against. So we care about a lot of different things. And so the OCD kind of thinks it's helping us and supporting us and keeping us safe on different avenues, right? And so then it finds that when you're at the grocery store and you have a fear of getting your wallet pickpocketed, that's what you're going to care about. Then on the ride home, you're afraid of hitting people with your car. So you're going to care about that. When you're making dinner, you're afraid that you're going to feed your kids something that they're going to get sick from and have an allergic reaction. So it kind of morphs with the things you care about, the things you're cautious about, etc. What I do want to challenge everyone to think about is a lot of times it's the mechanics or the underneath that's very similar with all subtypes, but it just looks different on the surface. Think about like cars, right? A van, a car, a motorcycle will get everybody from point A to B, but they look different, similar to OCD. So what I mean by that is, if somebody has a fear or a doubt around their sexual orientation with sexual orientation OCD, they hate that doubt. They want answers. They want that confirmation, that clarity, that those answers, right? They want to be 100% certain about their sexual orientation. And so they do compulsions or avoidances or mental rumination to try to figure their sexual orientation out. Well, that's the same thing with existentialism OCD. Why am I here? What's the purpose of life? Does it even make sense to do these things? There's doubt around our existence, doubt around why we're here, and they want to find answers. They want to look up philosophy, they want to find faith, they want to get some kind of answer about why things are the way they are so they can put it to rest. So always think about it underneath it, right? Like what is underneath the obsession? What is the doubt that's occurring? What are you trying to figure out? I think over time people start to see that is very similar. And then also what's really important is is starting to look at core fears, because a lot of times all these surface level fears, if you look at them, they all kind of come down to the same fear. So if you have harm OCD, it might show up in different ways, like hit and run OCD, accidentally poisoning somebody, emotionally harming them by saying something nasty. But when you look at it, it all comes back down to the same core fear. What if I become a person that's mean and hurtful? I don't want that to happen. Let me protect it. Somebody asked, are there other people who have had this difficulty recovering for a second time? So the question was around somebody that had gotten better and then they had a relapse and they're really struggling to get better the second time. What I would say is for a lot of people, if they've gone through treatment and they've gotten better and then they get hit with OCD a second time, I kind of find the opposite. Like I typically find that people will say like the second time's a little bit easier. They reconnect with their therapist or a new therapist, and it's like riding a bike. They remember the things that they should do. They get a good explanation about this subtype or the new things that come up. They get their medication right. Sometimes people will notice that the medication they took the first go around isn't helpful. So they end up having to take a different medication, which can be difficult. I think one thing that sometimes will happen though is like people will be mad that it's back or mad that it's taking a while to get rid of. And because of that extra agitation or because of that frustration, they'll notice like, oh, like that kind of like impacts your ability to get better, because if the whole time you're like, I don't want to have these thoughts, I don't want to feel this way, you're just feeding the OCD. So that acceptance part is so important, that radical acceptance. Okay, OCD's back. I got rid of it the first time. I have tools. I'll just go back into that. But if the whole time you're frustrated, it's not fair and agitated, now you have this extra layer that's kind of latched on. So that would be my strong suggestion with that one. Nikki says, I find that my OCD helps my ADHD when it comes to checking. If I don't check all the time, I really would lose and forget everything. Yeah. So sometimes people, so I have OCD. I've been diagnosed with ADHD. I was somebody that like stimulant medications made the OCD worse. I've had to learn how to manage my ADHD in a much different way. But yeah, I found that too. Is like sometimes my OCD had me like slow down and overthink things, where the ADHD wanted me to like do a bunch of things at once, and they kind of balanced each other. And as my OCD got better, I noticed that my ADHD got worse. So I think sometimes understanding co-occurring disorders and how they impact each other can definitely be something that you got to look into. Nathan says at 7:58 that a psychologist told you too much self-analysis isn't good for you. I think the reason it's bad in OCD, I mean, we should all be introspective and want to grow as people. But I think one thing that's really challenging is that with OCD, there's no endpoint. I don't know if you all feel that way, but in any of my subtypes, there was never like a good enough. It just kept wanting me to go and go and go and go and go and go. And there was never like a just like, okay, Chris, you've done enough. Let's move on. So I think that's probably why you were told that. It's just you get to that point where you hit a wall and it's just like, the OCD's never, it's never good enough. You want to just keep going. Well, thank you all for hanging out with me for the last hour. What's wild is it's funny because usually on the Wednesday live streams, there's like guests and everything. And for some reason, like I would think this would feel like it went longer because it's just me talking to y'all. But actually it went quick. I was just looking at the time. I'm like, oh my God, it's been an hour. So I don't know how Ethan does it. It's very different to only talk to yourself and to you all, because usually I have a co-host with Liz or a psychiatrist or guest. So this was cool. It made me feel more connected with the attendees. So I'm so glad you joined us. Yeah, Mauricio said it keeps moving the goalpost, OCD, for sure. I mean, just when you think the room's clean enough, just when you thought you prayed enough, just when you thought you tapped enough, OCD said it won't. But this was so much fun. So first and foremost, IOCF, thank you for allowing me to do community conversations. This was cool. Yes, thank you, Emilio. Killing it on the back end. It was really, really awesome. It's always nice to work with Emilio. But thank you for letting me join. I know Ethan, Katie, or someone will be back. Maybe Ethan, Emilio rather, could put in the chat or let me know in the chat, and I'll say. But yeah, one of them will be back. If you want to join me on Wednesdays with Liz McInvale or other guests, psychiatrists, etc., we meet every Wednesday at 12 noon Eastern. Definitely keep coming back Tuesday nights. It's 4 p.m. here. So Ethan will be back in 2 weeks. So you're going to see him. But yeah, I know for me, it's 4 in the afternoon, so it doesn't feel too late. But I know for a lot of you, it's 7 in the afternoon. For y'all international people, it's way later. I think Hawaii is the only people that are earlier than me. So in Hawaii, it's only like 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock. But thank you for having me on. Remember, you can get better. IOCDF.org has so many resources. It's incredible the things that you can find on that site. So please get help, support. A couple quick plugs. Like I said, if you have a family member or a loved one and you really want to make sure that they understand the OCD, you can always email us at info@ocdsocal.org and just ask to be on the family and loved one support group list. Also, OCD SoCal, we're an official affiliate of the International OCD Foundation. If you go to ocdsocal.org/conference, we're putting on a $20 low-cost conference, 2 days, November 15th and 16th. We'd love to have you. We also offer scholarships if $20 is too much, especially in this economy. We get it. So we'd love to have you. I know the IOCDF is having their Spanish language conference coming up and gearing up for OCD Awareness Week, which is the full second week of October. So please go to iocdf.org, but also follow them on YouTube, on Instagram, Facebook. They're always pumping out stuff that can be really awesome for people with OCD and give you support. I always, tell people I found my therapist on iocdf.org/find-help. So that's why I'm forever grateful to the foundation. That's how I found my OCD specialist. So you can go there as well. But like I said, if you want to, yes, that's the link. That's how I found my therapist all those years ago and why I'm here today and able to host this and not be stuck. So it was so good to see you all. All you are writing beautiful messages in the comments. Thank you so much. I always say the OCD community is the best. If I had to be part of any community, at least it was the OCD community because y'all are great. But have a wonderful rest of the day. I always tell people OCD sucks. Please don't listen to it. It's a liar. It's a cheat and never tells you anything truthful. You can handle safety on your own. You don't need OCD to do it for you. You got to start trusting yourself. Definitely say hi to Ethan when he's back. Always great programming on Tuesday afternoons. Hang out with me Wednesdays at 12 Eastern and have a wonderful rest of the day. And thank you, everybody, for the kind words, but also supporting each other in the chat. Take care from wherever you're at. And until I see you next time, take care. I'm Chris Tronson. Bye, everyone.